Jazz is a term that can be applied to a vast array of musical styles, anything from the big band music of Count Basie and Duke Ellington through the Rat Pack singers of Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., all the way to the rock, pop, funk fusions of the 80s from people like Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock. So in some ways, jazz is more a philosophy about how we might do music than a particular sound or style in itself. But anyway, hopefully in the future I can take you on a journey through this hugely exciting and fascinating world. But for the purposes of today, we just want to talk about the form or structure of music. And so ask the question, well, if we're listening to a piece of jazz music, how is that music likely to be structured? Just like the blues, jazz is very reliant on improvisation. In fact, almost the lion's share of the music is often given over for performers to compose melodies in real time on their instruments, essentially jam over the musical foundation that the rest of the players are providing. And so to facilitate this improvisation, we tend to also in jazz rely on some kind of repeated chord scheme. And it's interesting to see where these repeated chord schemes come from, because jazz musicians in the 20s, 30s and 40s just sort of took whatever was around really and tried to incorporate those structures into what they were doing. So you'll find, say someone like Charlie Parker was very good at improvising over the blues, that 12-bar structure that we've already looked at. But also he was just as comfortable improvising over popular songs that people in his audience probably would have known, or songs from musicals that were on Broadway at the time. Pretty much any kind of music that was around in society in America in the 20s, 30s and 40s tended to get sucked into being used as a basis for this improvisation. Say I wanted to perform the George Gershwin song Summertime with a jazz ensemble. This is a song from a musical, but it's been taken on by lots of jazz musicians as a vehicle for improvisation. What would that performance typically look like? Well, first of all, it's likely that everyone in the ensemble, at least once and maybe a couple of times, would play the head melody, and that is the melody that George Gershwin wrote for Summertime. I'm sure you know it. Summertime, when the living is easy, fish are jumping and the cotton is high. So we play that melody, all of us together, and it would sound quite similar to how you might hear it if you were hearing the song in its natural form. But then something different will happen. We'll actually start to get improvisations happening, and those improvisations will take place over the chord structure of the head or the Summertime melody. Now, Summertime is a 16-bar structure, and so what we'll have is a few sections of improvisation that take that 16-bar pattern and just repeat it over and over again, and the various different members of the ensemble can improvise over the top of that. So it might be, say, saxophone would improvise over that for maybe once through the structure, which would be 16 bars, probably more likely a couple of times through the structure. So that would be 32 bars of saxophone improvisation. Then maybe I would come in on the piano. I tend to play piano in these things, so I would come in next and do a similar length of improvisation for 32 or more bars, so a couple of times through the chord structure. It doesn't necessarily have to be once through for every instrument. And say after that we might have a trumpet play and do a similar improvisation, and they would play for 32 bars or whatever we felt like. And often, you know, when you're playing these tunes, improvisations tend to have a natural length, so they will seem to come to a close maybe 2 times through the chord structure, maybe 3 times, maybe more. And it's quite a skill actually to kind of build your improvisation and tell a story with it and then bring it to a close at the right time, and that's what lots of musicians work on. Once everyone who's going to improvise has had a turn to play, then you might see the band leader tapping their head, which means it's time to return to the head melody. So in this case, we would expect to hear the Summertime melody once again being performed by the ensemble all together. And that's really what the head does. It sort of acts like a pair of bookends on either end of this section of improvisation in the middle of the piece that makes up probably the majority of the music.